Hey guys, thank you for checking out this training. My name is Casey Ferris. I'm a colorist up in Oregon, and I want to show you DaVinci Resolve 12, give you a good introduction. If you've never used DaVinci Resolve ever, this will be good for you. If you're familiar with earlier versions of Resolve, this will be a nice intro to the new interface and the new ways that it works. Just a quick note before we get started, this training is made possible and made free by Ground Control. If you need color grading presets, color grading LUTs, or if you're looking for some more in-depth training, check out groundcontrolcolor.com. We have a brand new series out called Grading a Movie Trailer in Resolve 12. It's an end-to-end look at color grading a movie trailer for a client. So once you're done watching this, make sure to check out that in-depth training at groundcontrolcolor.com. I'll put a link in the description. All right, so let's jump in. I'm gonna open up Resolve, and this is the beta version. So if you're looking at this in the future, it might be a little bit different, but it should be pretty darn similar. So the first thing that comes up is the project manager. Might also look like this. And this is where you import previous projects. It's where you make new projects, you open projects that you're already working on. It's kind of like the open import dialog thing. So what I'm going to do is open this project called Intro, and it's just a new project that I made. Once you open a project, this is what it looks like. There's 4 main parts of Resolve, and they're called either tabs or rooms, depending on who you talk to. There's Media, Edit, Color, and Deliver. And this pretty much goes in the order in which you'd work. And so for media, this is where you import media and you manage things in your project. Edit is where you deal with timelines and things that you would normally do in a nonlinear editor like Premiere or Final Cut. It's where you can make adjustments and move clips around in time. The next tab is Color. This is where you adjust your colors, which is, of course, Resolve's strong point. And then Deliver, this is when you render your footage. You can either render it in one big long movie, or you can render individual source clips to bring into another program later. So we'll start in the Media tab, and I'm not going to go over every single thing. I just want to touch on the need to know things. Up here is your browser. This is where you can navigate to files on your machine, and you can access all of your hard drives and import things using this dialog. Now down here, this is called the media pool. The media pool is where you store everything that actually exists inside of your project. So this is kind of the stuff that's on your system. This is the stuff that you're actually going to have inside of your project. So I'll open up some media, and I just navigate to where my media is on my system. And once I click on a piece of media, it opens up here in my source window, and I can preview it. But basically, you use this to select the media that you want to import into your project. You can just drag these into your media pool, and when you drag a clip into your media pool, it's gonna compare the settings of the clip with the settings of your project. And if they're different, it's gonna say, okay, do you wanna keep the settings from your project, or do you wanna keep the settings from the clip? So if I hit change, it's gonna change my settings in my project to the settings of this clip, because it's the first clip that I dragged down. So I'm gonna hit change, because I do want everything to be like this. This is 1080p, and that's what I'm working in mostly. And so I'm just gonna grab a couple of these shots. And that's pretty much 90% of what happens here in the media tab. It's just importing any type of media that you need. Now, if I go over to edit, this is where I can actually start doing things. So up here is my media pool. So this is the exact same thing as in the media tab, but in the edit tab, it's up here. So I can grab my media. If I double click, it'll open up in the source window. And this tab is a lot like Final Cut or Premiere. There's the source window, there's the record or program window, and there's the timeline. And then up here is the media pool, which is like the project window in Premiere or a browser of some kind. And so I can select my clips here. I can even set an in and out with I and O on the keyboard. So maybe I'll set those down. I can just drag this down into the timeline, and it will make a new timeline with those settings pretty easily. And it acts just like a normal editor. It plays best with ProRes footage, or H.264 is a little bit harder for Resolve, but it can do it if you have a beefy system. But this is playing back pretty well, so I'm going to grab that, and let's grab some other shots here. And I can do all my basic editing things. I can grab different tools and chop up my clips. I can select things and delete them. Ripple delete. I have a bunch of options for viewing my tracks, and so I can click this and this will give me head and tail thumbnails. I can also adjust my audio tracks, and I can hit show audio waveforms, and that'll actually show me waveforms from the audio, which of course this footage doesn't have much to show, but you can bring those up. And so in this window I can preview what's happening in my timeline. And as I scrub through, obviously it plays things. So pretty simple. If you're familiar with an editor, this will make a lot of sense to you. One thing that's cool is this has a smart tool, which depending on where you hover over on the track, it kind of changes the way the tool acts. And so if I just go over this edit here, this will be a roll. And if I go towards the left or the right of this, I can just trim one clip. And up at the top, if I see this little red marker, I can drag it and this makes a fade. And so it's a really fast way to fade a clip in if I need to. And yeah, it's a pretty decent editor. If you have a beefy enough system to play things back, it works pretty well. And of course, like most editors, if I double click a clip, I can bring it up in my source monitor. If I go over here to inspector, this is the properties of the clip. And so I can adjust things like the opacity or the rotation. I can zoom it in and out, all the normal stuff that you would expect an editor to do. I can even crop it, which is great. And of course I can reset everything by hitting these little reset buttons up here. I also have some effects. If I go up here to effects library, I can click that and that will bring up my toolbox, which has tons of transitions, titles, generators, things like that. I can make color bars if I want to. I can do transitions just like you would in any editor. And my system has a little bit of a hard time playing those back, but if you have a beefy system, that could work pretty well. There's also support for open effects, and so if you have anything from Sapphire or some of the open effects plugins, you can put them on inside of Resolve in the Edit tab. There's also audio effects, and so you can open up audio plugins if you install them, and it actually supports VST plugins, which is really amazing. So if you have a really nice EQ plugin or something like that that you really like, you can use that right inside of Resolve 12. So those are the need to know things for the Edit tab. Now let's go to Color. This is where Resolve really shines. This is also the most complicated and probably the strangest interface if you haven't ever used Resolve. So really quickly, up here is what the viewer will see. So this is your main canvas or your main viewer, whatever you want to call it. Down here is the thumbnail timeline. It's really nice. You can pick different shots, and whatever shot you have selected will show up here, and it will also move the playhead over. And it also activates all of these controls, so if you change something, it affects the clip that's selected. And anytime you do something, of course, you can undo it by clicking these little circle arrows. One really slick thing about Resolve is if you do an adjustment to a clip, you can easily copy that to a different clip by selecting the clip you want to copy it to, and then middle clicking on your mouse the clip that you want to copy from. So if I want to make this clip pink, I can just middle click with this clip selected onto the pink clip, and it will turn this clip pink. There's also a nice trick to reset your color grade by finding an untouched clip and doing the same thing. Middle clicking, and it will reset the colors. Anytime I do have a clip adjusted, it makes a little rainbow selection over the number. And that's so you can easily tell that you did something to the clip and that it hasn't just been untouched. It's also convenient. It tells you the type of codec each clip is shot in, just for your knowledge. Down here we have the mini timeline. This gives you kind of a bird's eye view of your whole project, and you can independently zoom in and out of that. So you can quickly move to the end or the front of your project and kind of see where you're at overall. It's especially useful if you have a couple hundred shots and you kind of get lost in the middle and you want to know how far along you are. Super nice. Down here we have the major color controls, and there's a lot here, but the main basic need to know stuff is the main thing is color wheels. These are probably the easiest to understand controls. It's split up into lift, gamma, and gain, which is just fancy colorist talk for the darkest parts of the image, the midtones, and the brightest parts of the image. And so if I want to change the color of this spatula and I push it towards pink, that's going to make this whole thing pink, but I can bring it back using the lift, and the darker parts of the image will turn green while the lighter parts of the image turn pink. So pretty much everything is based off of that idea, is you make adjustments to certain parts of the image and it gives you different looks. A common look is to have warm highlights and cool shadows. And so I can take my highlights, which is my gain, and just move that towards warm. And I can take my lift here, which is the darker parts, and bring it towards cool. And so that gives it a nice flavor. Definitely not realistic, but totally stylized. I can also adjust the brightness of each part of the image. So I can grab this wheel and mouse to the right, and that'll make things brighter, especially the brightest parts of the image. I can adjust the wheel under my lift, and that'll darken the shadows. And then the gamma is in between. I also have the offset wheel, which moves everything all at once. And so if you have really messed up white balance and you need to correct that, that's an easy way to maybe just warm up the whole image before you even start playing with the lift, gamma, or gain. And it also has a brightness slider under it for adjusting the brightness of the entire image as a whole. So those are the primary wheels. If you click on this thing that says Primaries Wheels, there's Primaries bars and log. The Primaries bars are the exact same type of controls as the wheels. It's just a different way of looking at it. And so if I push up this red bar in my gain and go back to my wheels, you'll see that my wheel is just pushed towards red. So these are the exact same controls. It's just a different way of displaying that control. There's also log, and log is basically just a more detailed version of these color wheels. And so you can get some really, really interesting looks. If I want to just make my highlights yellow, I can push my highlights towards yellow and it will only affect the highlights because the log controls separate these a little bit more and it doesn't change the whole image quite as much. It keeps them a little bit more separate. So I can get into a lot of detail with that, but for now, for basics, just stick with the Primaries wheels. They're a little bit easier to understand. And 90% of the adjustments you'd want to make in this section would just be with the Primaries wheels anyway. Behind here, there's a couple other detailed things, which we probably don't have time to get into. One thing I do want to say is that there's a camera raw palette. So if you shoot in camera raw in some type of DNG sequence, or if you shoot Magic Lantern raw, you can access the raw data right here in that palette, which is awesome. To the right of the primaries is the curves. And of course you have the curves just like you would in Photoshop or After Effects. That makes a lot of sense. And you can reset things by right-clicking the points. And these curves are kind of stacked on top of each other. So if you want to grab the red curve, just hit this R button right here, and you can adjust your red curve. You can play with the curves all at once and see what the differences are with them laid on top of each other. And it's worth noting that this is called the custom curves in Resolve, which is just what they call basically what we all think of as curves. But there's also some fancier curves in here. There's hue versus hue, and this adjusts things based on the hue in the image. And so this blue bowl, I can click with my color picker and it adds a point here on my curve. And I can adjust this up and down and it will change the color of that bowl. Anything that matches that blue, it's going to change. And then I can widen out this curve and make that change a little bit softer and adjust my colors that way. This is really nice if you have something that's the wrong color in a shot. If somebody's wearing a bright red dress and you want it to be a blue dress, this is a really easy way to kind of shift that hue a little bit. And there's a few curves like this. There's hue versus hue, hue versus saturation, which is just pick a hue and you can saturate or desaturate just that hue. And there's hue versus luminance. So you can choose how bright or dark to make certain hues. Luminance versus saturation, which is really important. A quick way to make your blacks black and your whites white is just to add a point in the middle and bring these side points down. And that means that everything that's supposed to be white will be white, everything that's supposed to be black will be black, and then you can go crazy in the middle for the most part, and you'll still have blacks and whites. And there's also saturation versus saturation, so you can kind of remap how saturated things are. It's definitely an interesting control to play with, but it's nice if you have something that's maybe a little bit too saturated that you just want to bring down and keep the saturation of things that are at a reasonable level. So that's curves. Behind here we also have qualifier, which is a way of keying. And so let's look at this blue bowl again. If I click on the blue bowl with my eyedropper, it makes a selection and it says, okay, I'm going to select things that are blue and not very saturated and kind of have middle of the road brightness. And then I can adjust what's being selected, and it'll only change the things that are being selected. And so if I widen this out, it's going to select more and more hues. And so that's a great way to select problematic parts of your image or parts of your image that you want to change specifically without affecting other parts. So this is the traditional way of pulling a key or doing a qualifier inside of DaVinci Resolve. A qualifier being when you tell Resolve to just change a certain hue or saturation or luminance value. But if I click on HSL right here and go down to 3D, this is a brand new keyer, which is pretty amazing. What I can do is go up to my preview window here and I just draw a line, and it'll make a selection based on the average colors under this line. And if I select this little magic wand up here, it'll show me just what's selected on top of gray. And if I go to this little buddy right here and hit highlight black and white, then we can really see what's going on. I'm just selecting this table, and I can even add more samples to adjust my selection. Now if I turn off my magic wand, then I can just adjust the table. So that's kind of an alternate way of pulling a key. If you like to do it this way, that's great. If you'd rather use the HSL, that's a great way to do it too. We also have windows. These are a lot like masks in After Effects. And so if I want to just change one section of an image, I can click on one of these shapes and I can adjust it in my viewer. And there I can just adjust one part of the image based on my window here. And each type of window has a bunch of controls down here. You can adjust how soft it is, the size, the aspect, how much to rotate it, and there's different controls for each one. Now let's go to a different shot. One of the most amazing parts of Resolve is its tracker. That's on the fourth little button from the left here in the middle palette. So I can put a window on this image and I can hit track. I can either track reverse or forward, and I'm halfway through the shot, so I'm just going to track in reverse. And it's going to stick this window to the image. And so it can move around, and let's say I want to warm up this spot right here. So now this window moves along with our chocolate, which is pretty awesome. Super amazing tracker. This is perfect for lighting up people's faces if they're moving around, maybe during an interview or during a close-up shot, that type of thing. Brightening or darkening things in moving shots. The tracker is pretty much the most amazing part of Resolve. It's excellent. Behind that, we have some blur and sharpen controls, some resizing ability, and a couple other things that we probably don't need to get into right now. But those are the main things you're going to use over here is your curves, your qualifiers, your windows, and your tracker. To the right, I have my scopes open. Yours might look more like this. This is where your keyframes live, and so you can do keyframe animation if you want to. We also have this button here, which will bring up your scopes. And if you're new to scopes, here's a little bit of a crash course. I'm going to open these up so that we can see them a little bit bigger. Both the waveform and the parade are based off of the same concept. The parade is just 3 waveforms, one for the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. And a waveform is a graph of the brightness of the pixels versus the horizontal position. So something that's towards the left of the screen will be also on the left of the waveform. But something that's at the top of the screen won't necessarily be at the top of the waveform because up and down is brightness. So this part right here, this line, is this white part right here because this is the brightest part of the image and it's on the left side of the screen. So this is a bright part on the left side of the screen. That's our spatula. So if I were to bring the gain up, this is going to push up the brightness of the whole shot and start to clip out this spatula. If I bring it down, of course, it brings it down. And so you can really see by looking at the waveform how these sliders affect the brightness of the image. So this is just the luminance of the image, but by default the waveform is red, green, and blue, and they're overlaid. So that's just the brightness of each channel. So if something is really, really red, you can see the red channel is a lot higher than the green or the blue channel. And so this is pretty much the same thing as the parade, which is just those three waveforms side by side. And so it's just a couple different ways of displaying the brightnesses of each channel. And that's how you do color balancing. And so if you want something to be totally white, you want to make sure that it's level on all three of these graphs, because something that has equal values, red, green, and blue, is neutral. So if I want this bowl to be completely black, that's right here on our scopes. I'm going to play with the lift wheel until those are balanced out, and that's going to give me a neutral black. But of course right now it's just dark gray, and if I push it down with the lift slider, then I can push it down more towards black. And that's essentially how you balance an image. If you need to adjust the white balance, you can play with the gain wheel and you try and balance out your scopes. And the reason we use scopes is because our eyes will play tricks on us. If I have a shot like this and I push it a little bit more warm and I stare at this for long enough, I'll pretty much just stop noticing that it's tinted warm, and my eyes will start telling my brain that this is balanced. But a quick look at my scopes tells me that it's definitely not balanced, it's warm. So that's pretty much why we use the scopes. And we're going to look at one more, which is the vector scope. This one, instead of graphing brightness and horizontal position, graphs hue and saturation. The hue of the image is graphed in the direction, and the saturation is how far away this cloud is from the middle. And so if I take away all of my saturation here, you'll see there's basically nothing going on in the middle. But if I push it, it pushes this cloud out from the middle. And if I rotate my hue, you can see it rotates that graph. So this is a nice way just to visually know how saturated your image is and what color it is. And most of the time I'll use a combination of scopes. I'll usually have my vector scope and my waveform, or possibly vector scope and parade. Then I can know everything that I need to know about the image, the hue, saturation, and luminance. So I'm going to close my scopes and open them back up in the docked window here. And we can switch between the docked window and the floating window with this little button there. And the last part about the color interface is the node graph. This is the part that people kind of look at and get really scared because they don't understand nodes. If you haven't worked with nodes before, they can be a little bit strange. But for basic corrections in Resolve, it's not really a big deal. Here's what you need to know. This part is the input. This is like your raw footage. This one over here is the output. And so whatever happens between the input and the output is your color correction. Each one of these nodes is just a group of adjustments that you do. So anything that you do in any of these windows here will be applied to whatever node is selected. And so if I were to make this really, really pink, then this first node holds that correction. If I go up to nodes and say add serial node, and I push it back to green, and I can just about balance this image out again. And these nodes go in order. So if we turn them both off, we have our original footage, and then I'm turning it pink, and then next I'm compensating by pushing a whole bunch of green into the image. And then that feeds right into the output, so that's the way it's going to render. The cool thing about using nodes is you can do your color grading in parts, which makes it really convenient if you want to go back and change something later. So I'm going to reset everything, and let's say I want to do my initial color correction. So maybe I'll darken this down a little bit, brighten it up a little bit, bring down the midtones, and saturate it. And everything that I just did is in this first node. This is my primary color balance. So I can right click on a node and change a label, and I'll call it primary. And that's just so I can keep myself organized. And I can go up to nodes and hit add serial node. And now I can take this image and do whatever I want to it. Let's say I want to add a contrast curve. I can do that. Make it a little bit more punchy. Maybe warm it up just a little. And that adds some style to my shot. So I'll label that style. So now I have my correction in 2 nodes, which means I can turn off the style node at any time and just see my regular looking image. And I can keep building and tweaking and playing around with things without messing with my original color correction. Because if I don't like this, I can just select it and hit delete, and I still have all the work that I did before. This is also a really nice way to work because you can copy looks in between clips a lot easier. So let's say I want to work on this clip, and I middle click on this end shot, but it's a little bit dark. I can turn off my style for a second and go back to my primary. And maybe I want to brighten that up a little bit. I can do those adjustments in my first node and then turn my style back on, and it'll match a little better. So it's kind of like working in parts so that you can save the parts that you like and experiment with the parts that you don't like. And again, I'm just middle clicking to copy and paste grades in between shots. So now that we know some of the basics, let's put it to work. So here's our first shot. And the first thing I'm going to do is make sure this is balanced and set my contrast. So I'm going to be looking at my scopes here. So maybe I'll start with my waveform. And what I want to do is set things so that they are right. This is a bright white plate. And so for it to look right, it needs to be bright white. And the brightest part of this image is only at like 700 or so, which is like 70% brightness. So it needs to be brighter. So I'm going to take my gain wheel and I'm going to bring it up. And you can see the shot gets brighter and our scope grows to show us how bright it is. And I might just leave it more around 80 or 90% because that's already looking a lot better. And I'm also going to darken down my shadows because I want those to be nice and dark so that we have some contrast there. So I'm going to grab my lift wheel and push it down just a little bit. I don't want it all the way down because it's not going to be totally black. This is just chocolate. It's not going to have super dark shadows. So that's good. And now I can kind of play with my midtones until I like it. There isn't much of a technical way of figuring out how bright the midtones need to be. It's more of a taste thing. So that looks pretty good for the exposure and the contrast. And now I need to figure out how saturated I want this. So I'm going to switch over to my vector scope. And remember, this is hue for the direction and saturation for how far away it is from the middle. And so I'm going to push my saturation up a little bit until that looks nice and tasty. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to close my scopes here, put them back in the dock there. And that's a pretty nice looking primary grade for our first shot. Now I'm going to go to my next shot and just copy that grade over by middle clicking and see what it looks like. Now it's a little bit bright, so I'm just going to take my gain and just bring it down until I start to see this information come back in the waveform. And I'll just bring that down to 896 or so. And that's looking a lot better. I might push my shadows down and play with my gamma until I like that. Saturation's probably pretty good. I might bump it just a little. And that's a pretty good balance. Now I'll move on to my next shot and middle click to copy. And because these two shots are pretty similar, that's going to look pretty good. So I might just move on. Here's my fourth shot, middle click. That looks pretty good. I think I might just brighten it just a little and push up the midtones just a little. Yeah, I like that. Let's go to our next shot and middle click to copy. And this looks like it was overexposed. And here's our shot. That looks pretty nice. I might just boost it up a little. I don't want to crush out this white part. I want to keep that detail there. So I'm going to push up the gamma a little more and maybe push my lift down just a little to compensate. And that's looking pretty nice. So now I have all of my shots pretty much balanced. And now let's say I want to add some style. One way I can do that is just go up to nodes and add a serial node and do my style like this. Maybe push some warmth into the midtones and cool down the shadows a little bit. And I'll just label this style. And with this node selected, I can hit Control-C on my keyboard and go to my next shot, add a serial node, and hit Control-V for paste. And that will paste that same stylistic adjustment onto that node. And I can go through and do it like that and add that same look to all of my shots. And that works pretty well. But here's the problem. If I decide I don't like this look later, and I think, okay, well, maybe I want the highlights a little bit warmer, then I'd have to copy this again and go to my other shot and paste, and paste, and paste, and paste to update my look over my whole project. Which isn't terrible if there's 5 shots, but if there's tons and tons of shots, it's going to be a rough time. So what I'm going to do is copy this by hitting Control-C, and then I'm just going to delete it. And I'm going to go through all my shots and delete this, because there's a smarter way to put style over our whole project. Now we just have our initial grades, and I'm going to select my first shot in my timeline here, and then Shift select my last shot, and that puts this red selection box around everything. That means I have all of these shots selected. And I can right click on any shot and I'll say add into a new group. And I can call this food. It doesn't matter. You can name the group whatever you want. And then I can just select any of these shots. And when I have any of these shots that are in the group selected, it adds this little green chain link. And that means that all of these are grouped together. So how do we adjust them as a group? If we go up here to our node graph where it says clip, and you twirl it down, there's a couple of options here. There's group pre-clip, clip, group post-clip, and timeline. And each one of these is a different node tree. And so if I said group pre-clip, and I made everything blue, then that would turn all of these shots blue, and then it would do our initial adjustments on it. Because these kind of go in order. First it does anything in group pre-clip, then it does stuff in clip, then post-clip, and then timeline. And the order that you do things is pretty important. Here's why. If I went to group pre-clip and desaturated everything, and then if I went to clip and turned off all my adjustments, you see this is what I have to work with, is this desaturated image. So I can't do any qualifiers or any keying because I don't have any color information. So I'm going to take this off of the pre-clip and go to post-clip. Now if I take the saturation down, and if I go back to my clip and hit highlight, then this will show me only what this node is doing. And you see I have all of my color information. Even though at the end everything looks black and white, it's doing that black and white desaturation after my clip adjustments in the post clip. So clip stuff, if I made this really, really red, it doesn't matter because after that it desaturates everything. But if I went to post clip and added a node and then made that red, you can see it turns everything red because it's just taking this black and white image and tinting it red. So the order matters, and these node trees are in order. So I'm going to reset everything here and go back to my original grade on my clip, and I'll go down to group post clip because I want to add a look over everything after my corrections, and I'm going to hit Control V, and that's going to paste that style that I had applied earlier. And so now there's style over everything in that group, and if I want to change the style, I can just do that and it will apply to every single shot. So that's a great way to work if you have a look that you want to put over everything. Another quick thing that's pretty cool about the color tab is this button up here called Lightbox. If I click that, then it shows all of my clips in big thumbnail mode. And if I click and drag, I can actually scrub through these clips and I can pick a thumbnail by just letting go. So this is a great way to compare how your shots look, find shots that haven't been corrected, or just in general get a bird's eye view of your project. And to get out of this, I'll just hit Lightbox again and I'm back to my color tab. So those are the basics of the color tab inside of Resolve 12. The last tab is Deliver. This is where you're going to set your in and out points for your render, and you'll pick all of your render options. These should be pretty self-explanatory. You want to set your resolution and your frame rate, as well as your audio channels and your file name, your video format and your codec, and the quality. And you can either pick individual source clips, which will render each one of these as a separate movie, or you can pick single clip, which will render this whole thing as one big movie. And depending on your system and your workflow, you're going to pick the format and the codec that's right for you. Real quick, something that's easy to mess up on is sometimes Resolve will randomly set an endpoint in your timeline, and you'll think that all of these clips are going to render, but really your endpoint is right here, which you can tell on this timeline down here. And so unless you're selecting a specific clip or a range of clips to render, it's a good idea just to hit Select All Clips, because that will get rid of your in and out points and it'll render all of your clips. Once you set all of your settings, just hit Add to Render Queue, and it'll ask where it needs to go, tell it where to go, and it'll add a job over here to the render queue. And whenever you're ready to go, just hit Start Render, and it'll go through and make all of your movie files or your one big movie file. From there, you can import the clips back into an NLE like Premiere, or if it's just one big file, then you're done. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like this, make sure to let me know by hitting that like button. If you want more tutorials on color grading, color correction, post-production, editing, all of that stuff, make sure to subscribe to my channel here on YouTube. And again, if you need tools to help you with color grading, whether it's presets or LUTs, or some more in-depth training, check out groundcontrolcolor.com. Especially check out grading the movie trailer in Resolve 12. It's pretty awesome. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments below. And I think that about does it for me. My name's Casey Ferris. I'll catch you next time.